Welcome to Tuesday Lunch and Learn. I'm James Shore. Every week we look at software engineering topics, and this week I have a special show for you. I'm going to be reading from the new edition of my book, The Art of Agile Development. I am really looking forward to it. Uncle Scientist, welcome to the show. Third Man, welcome. Thanks for coming back. Grumpy Gave Dev. Yes, we'll just pretend that never happened. I'll edit it right out of the final video. So today we're looking at the second edition of The Art of Agile Development. This, of course, is my book from 2000, originally published in 2007. I wrote it along with Shane Warden. It's I think, a pretty well-loved book. It was pretty popular. People still talk about it today. And it is overdue for an update. So I am really happy to say that I am working on an update for it. If you'd like to see what we're doing with it, go right down here, jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2, and you'll see the current page. And this is going to be developed entirely in the open. It's coming out on O'Reilly Early Release later this month, which means you'll be able to see the chapters that we've written so far. And then as we write additional chapters, those are actually going to go up on my website for feedback and comment, and we will take those comments and bring them into the actual book. And if you'd like to be informed about when that happens, go to this short link here. Let me put this up on the screen. But right here, jamesshore.com/s/updates, or you can follow me on Twitter and look at the hashtag AOAD2 hashtag, and I'll be putting announcements on Twitter as well. As Uncle Scientist mentions in the chat, I have updated the site design to go along with the upcoming release of the book, and I like it a lot better. If you saw the old design, the nicest thing I could say about it is that it was a very classic design, but I'm much happier with the new design now. Afi98, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Jitter Ted, glad to see you again too. What's new? Oh, by the way, I want to mention, of course, that I am following along with Twitch chat. Your comments are very welcome as we go along. Please put them in. I'll address them as we go. And I do not know what you mean by that, Grumpy Game Dev. Sorry. I'll be addressing them as we go. And let me take you over to the upcoming table of contents. Now, this is a draft table of contents. The original edition of the book was aimed at the sort of early majority of companies who wanted to try out Agile. People had heard of Agile, but they weren't really using it yet. And so the first edition of the book was, this is how you use Agile in your company. And now it's 13 years later, and everybody has heard of Agile. Almost everybody has worked in a place that's called itself Agile in some way. And whether they have or not, everybody has an opinion on what Agile is. And there's a ton of misinformation about Agile and a lot of bad Agile. So Shane and I are rewriting the book for a modern audience. Here's what Agile really is, and here's how to make it really work. We're keeping the pragmatic, down-to-earth, here's how to do it approach, but we're updating absolutely everything else. You can see the first part has been completely rewritten. The table of contents is brand new. We're restructuring everything, moving it all around. There's going to be more about how to customize Agile, more about the ideas behind Agile, and more about working with modern cloud-oriented development. So in a moment, Grumpy Game Dev says, do you mean that simply labeling it Agile and still being waterfall isn't actually Agile? Yeah, I would say so. In fact, we'll get to that when I read the excerpt, which I'll get to in just a moment. I'm going to read the first chapter of the book, which is called What is Agile? But even if you think you know what Agile is, or even if you do know what Agile is, I think you might enjoy this chapter. I'm really proud of it. Before we get going, I want to remind you all that this show, and in fact, the writing of the book, is made possible by the people who hire me for training and consulting. It turns out that writing a book, at least a technical book, is not a way to riches. It may be a way to fame, maybe, but it's certainly not a way to riches. So what allows me to do this show, this software development show every week, and what allows me to write this book is the people who hire me for training and consulting. People who have the capability for a lot of business agility but don't have the capacity hire me for anything from software development training, like test-driven development training, all the way up to process design and how to get several teams working together smoothly. Because when you have a large environment, the teams often form bottlenecks, and that is a process problem, it's a social problem, it's also a technical problem. And I help out with these things. Okay, let's get to the book. Now, again, to be notified about when the early release is available, go ahead and sign up for the updates here. There's an RSS feed, or you can sign up for email updates. It's jamesshore.com/s/updates. While I'm reading the excerpt, the first chapter, go ahead and put your comments in the chat. I'm going to sort of wait until the end of the excerpt. It's going to take about 20 minutes to read, and then we'll have the rest of the time, another 55 minutes or so from now, to discuss your comments and questions. So just put them all in, and we'll have a nice conversation afterward. All right, let's get to it. So part 1, improving agility, and chapter 1, what is Agile? Agile is everywhere, and paradoxically, nowhere. In the 20 years after the Agile freight train roared into software developers' conscious, the number of companies calling themselves Agile increased by orders of magnitude. The number of teams actually taking an Agile approach to their work? Not so much. The Agile, the easily repeated name, is enormously successful. The ideas behind Agile, well, most of them are ignored. Let's fix that. Agile's genesis. In the 1990s, software development was believed to be in crisis. They actually called it that, the software crisis. Software projects were over budget, late, didn't meet requirements, and, according to the oft-quoted and ominously named Chaos Report, a third of them failed outright. Agile wasn't a response to this crisis, far from it. Agile was a response to the response. To bring software development under control, big organizations created highly detailed processes that defined exactly how software was to be created. Everything was tightly controlled so that no mistakes could be made, in theory, anyway. First, business analysts would interview stakeholders and document the system requirements. Next, software architects would read the requirements documents and create detailed design documents specifying every component of the system and how they related to each other. Then, programmers would convert the design documents to code. In some organizations, this was considered low-skill work, just a mechanical translation exercise. In fact, programming was considered such a mechanical activity that, for a while, there was a movement called CASE, computer-aided software engineering, to automatically convert architectural diagrams into code. Meanwhile, test leads would use the same documents to generate test plans, and when coding was done, armies of QA personnel would manually follow those test plans and report variances as defects. After each phase, everything would be carefully documented, reviewed, and signed off. This approach was called waterfall development or phase gate development. If it sounds like a ridiculous straw man, well, consider yourself fortunate. Not every company used a heavyweight process in the 90s, but it was widely recognized as a logical and sensible way to work. Of course you needed to define requirements, then design, then implement, then test. Of course you needed to document every phase. This was discipline. This was engineering. How else could you possibly succeed? Born out of crisis. Big companies define their processes in excruciating detail. Roles, responsibilities, document templates, change control boards, every aspect of development was defined and controlled. If a project didn't succeed, and according to the Chaos Report, 2/3 of them didn't, it was because the process needed more detail, more documents, more sign-offs. It resulted in a massive amount of documentation. Martin Fowler called it the almighty thud. This wasn't a great way to work. It was bureaucratic and dehumanizing. Skill didn't seem to matter as much as adherence to process. Programmers felt they were interchangeable cogs in an impersonal machine. It didn't even work all that well. So several people independently developed simpler, slimmer, and less prescriptive methods for developing software. They were called lightweight methods, in contrast to the heavyweight methods used by big companies. These new methods had names like adaptive software development, Crystal, feature-driven development, dynamic systems development method, extreme programming, and Scrum. By the late 90s, these methods were attracting serious attention. Extreme programming in particular saw an explosion of grassroots interest among programmers. In 2001, 17 of the lightweight methodology proponents met at a ski resort in Utah to discuss unifying their efforts. The Agile Manifesto. I personally didn't expect this particular group of people to ever agree on anything substantive, Alistair Coburn said later. And in fact, after 2 days, they only accomplished 2 things: the name Agile and a statement of 4 values. Over the following months, over email, they hashed out 12 accompanying principles. This was the Agile Manifesto. It changed the world. So, as Alistair said later, they did agree on something substantive after all. But there was no unified Agile method. There never has been and never will be. Agile is 3 things: the name, the values, and the principles. That's it. It's not something you can do. It's a philosophy, a way of thinking about software development. You can't use Agile or do Agile. You can only be Agile or not. If your teams embody the Agile philosophy, then they're Agile. If they don't, they're not. The essence of Agile. Martin Fowler has made a career out of turning complicated software topics into well-considered, even-handed explanations. His explanation of the essence of Agile development is one of the best. Agile development is adaptive rather than predictive, people-oriented rather than process-oriented. Martin Fowler. Adaptive rather than predictive. Remember the chaos report which said that only 1/3 of software projects were successful? It had a very specific definition of success. Successful, completed on time, on budget, with all features and functions as originally specified. Challenged, completed and operational but over budget, over the time estimate, with fewer features and functions than originally specified. Impaired, canceled at some point during the development cycle. These definitions illustrate the predictive mindset perfectly. They're all about conformance to plan. If you did what you said you were going to do, you were successful. If you didn't, you weren't. Easy. It makes sense at first, but look closer. There's something missing. As Ryan Nelson commented in CIO magazine, projects that were found to meet all the traditional criteria for success, time, budget, and specifications, may still be failures in the end because they fail to appeal to the intended users or because they ultimately fail to add much value to the business. Similarly, projects considered failures according to traditional IT metrics may wind up being successes because despite cost, time, or specification problems, the system is loved by its target audience or provides unexpected value. For example, at a financial services company, a new system was 6 months late and cost more than twice the original estimate. Final cost was $5.7 million. But the project ultimately created a more adaptive organization after 13 months and was judged to be a great success. The company had a $33 million reduction in write-off accounts, and the reduced time to value and increased capacity resulted in a 50% increase in the number of concurrent collection strategy tests in production. Agile teams define success as delivering value, not conforming to a plan. In fact, truly agile teams actively look for opportunities to increase value by changing their plans. Take a second look at the manifesto. See Figure 1 and Figure 2. Welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. How many of its values and principles relate to delivering valuable software and adapting to feedback? You can see the Agile Manifesto at agilemanifesto.org. People-oriented rather than process-oriented. Heavyweight processes tried to prevent errors by carefully defining every aspect of software development. By putting the smarts in the process, individual skill became less important. In theory, you could apply the same process over and over with different people and get the same results. Come to think of it, they kind of did, just not the results they wanted. Agile says people are the most important factor in software development success. Not just their skills, but all aspects of their humanity. How well team members work together, how many distractions they encounter, how safe they feel, whether they're comfortable voicing dissent, and whether they feel motivated by their work. Agile teams have a process. Every team does, even if it's implicit, but the process is in service of the humans, not the other way around. And Agile teams are in charge of their own process. When they think of a better way of working, they change it. Look back at the manifesto. Again, agilemanifesto.org. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. Which values and principles relate to putting people first? Why Agile won? In the first 10 years after the manifesto, Agile faced enormous criticism. It was undisciplined, critics said. It could never work. Another 10 years after that, the critics were silent. Agile was everywhere, at least in name. Heavyweight waterfall methods were effectively dead. Some younger programmers had trouble believing anybody ever could have worked that way. There's actually nothing inherently wrong with the basic waterfall process. If you keep it slim and operate in a well-understood domain, waterfall can work well. The problem was the heavyweight processes big companies used. Ironically, the processes designed to prevent problems actually caused many of the problems organizations were seeing. With software, it's very difficult to imagine how it will work before you actually use it, and it's even harder to think of absolutely everything your software needs to do. This is doubly true for people who aren't actively involved with software development. As a result, it's critically important to get working software in front of people as soon as possible. You need to get feedback about what's missing or wrong, then change your plans based on what you learn. As the manifesto says, working software is the primary measure of progress. Learning and responding to change are at the heart of what Agile is all about. Those heavyweight processes put so much emphasis on process controls and documentation and sign-offs that they incurred a huge amount of delay and overhead. They took years to produce working software, and they had nothing concrete to show until near the end. Instead of welcoming change, they actively worked to prevent change. They actually had a dedicated part of the process, the Change Control Board, whose primary purpose was to say no to change requests. Or, more accurately, yes, but it will cost you. All of this added up to projects that spent years in development before they had anything to show. When they did, it was too late and too expensive to make changes. They ultimately shipped software that didn't do what customers needed. A typical heavyweight failure. On February 3, 2005, Robert S. Mueller III, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, later famous for his role investigating Donald Trump, appeared before a Senate subcommittee to explain how the FBI had managed to waste $104.5 million. This couldn't have been a comfortable position to be in. In June 2001, the FBI had launched VCF, a project designed to replace the Bureau's case management software. 4 years later, it was canceled at a total cost of $170 million, $104.5 million of which were completely unrecoverable. The timeline for VCF tells an all too familiar story. The project launched in June 2001. 17 months later, in November 2002, solid requirements had been established. The software was delivered a year after that, in December 2003, but the FBI immediately discovered a number of deficiencies in VCF that made it unusable. The contractor building VCF agreed to fix the problems, but only at the cost of an additional $56 million and another year of development. Ultimately, the FBI declined to fix the problems, scrapping years of work. In many ways, Mueller said during his testimony, the pace of technical innovation has overtaken our initial vision for VCF, and there are now products to suit our purposes that did not exist when VCF began. Although there are a variety of approaches to Agile, and some of them are more about co-opting a popular name than following the actual philosophy, one thing they all have in common is a focus on making progress visible and allowing stakeholders to make course corrections as they go. This seems like a small thing, but it's incredibly powerful. It's why we no longer hear about a software crisis. Software is still late. It's still over budget. But Agile teams don't spend years building failures. And that's huge. There's more to Agile than just providing visibility. But this one thing, this was enough. It's why everybody wanted Agile. Cargo cult Agile. At first, Agile was a grassroots movement. It was largely driven by programmers seeking better results and better quality of life. As it became more successful, Agile's momentum shifted from the underlying ideas to hype. Rather than saying, let's get better results by adapting our plans and putting people first, organization leaders started saying, everybody's talking about Agile. Get me some Agile. The thing is, there is no Agile to go get. It's just a set of values and principles. There are specific Agile approaches, such as extreme programming and Scrum, that will tell you how to be Agile, but you still have to be on board with the underlying philosophy. And for a lot of organizations, that underlying philosophy, adapting plans and putting people first, is really, really foreign. The cargo cults. Back in the 1940s, the story goes, American troops landed on a remote island. The natives of the island had never seen modern civilization before and were amazed by the men and materials Allied forces brought to the island. They watched the troops set up an airstrip and a tower, don headphones, and call great metal birds filled with valuable cargo down from the heavens. When the birds landed, shares of the cargo were distributed to all of the islanders, bringing prosperity and comfort. One day the troops left, and the great metal birds stopped arriving. Missing their cargo, the islanders made their own airstrip out of woven bamboo. They constructed a tall platform, placed their chief on the platform, and had him don coconuts carved to look like headphones. But no matter how hard they tried, the great metal birds never returned. I first saw this story in the writings of Richard Feynman. Wikipedia says it's based in reality. The tragedy of the cargo cult is its adherence to the superficial outward signs of some idea combined with ignorance of how that idea actually works. In the story, the islanders replicated all the elements of cargo drops, the airstrip, the tower, the headphones, but didn't understand the vast infrastructure that enabled airplanes to arrive. The same tragedy occurs with Agile. People want Agile's cargo, better results, more visibility, fewer business failures. But they don't understand the underlying philosophy and often wouldn't agree with it even if they did. They want to buy Agile, but you can't buy an idea. What they can buy is the outward signs of Agile. Stand-up meetings, user stories, tools, consultants. There's lots of stuff labeled Agile and plenty of people eager to sell it to you. It's often labeled as enterprise grade, which is a way of saying, don't worry, you won't have to change. Uncomfortable ideas like adaptive planning and people-centric are ignored. And that's how you get a cargo cult. All the activity, none of the results. The Agile part is missing. At my old company, they wasted a huge number of man-hours in meetings. Agile cost an entire team, 30-plus people, their jobs, as they produced almost nothing for almost a year. All Agile means is developers get shafted when the project changes the day before delivery. It's because of Agile there are 80 developers and products being developed, or being shipped. I can't take this Agile crap anymore. It's lunacy. Comments about Agile from around the web. The name Agile is everywhere. The ideas of Agile aren't. It's become self-perpetuating. For many, the only Agile they know is cargo cult Agile. It's time to fix that. In the rest of this book, I'll show you how to apply Agile ideas for real. Keep an eye out for the cargo cult Agilists shown in the margin. They'll show you what not to do. Ready? Let's go. So that is the first chapter of the Art of Agile Development. Thank you, Uncle Scientist. So I think that hopefully gives you a bit of the idea of what we're going for in this book, how the focus has changed from the first edition. The first edition, again, was really about exposing people to what Agile is and how to use it. And the second edition is for all those people who are already using Agile or something they think is Agile, and talking to them about how they can make it better. And a lot of it is centered around the Agile Fluency model, which I developed with Diana Larson. You can see that in the table of contents, we've got part 2 is focusing on agility, which corresponds to the focusing zone of the Agile Fluency model. Part 3 is about delivering reliably, which is about the delivering zone and more about technical practices. And part 4 is about optimizing outcomes. That's the optimizing zone. It's about creating how you can really be adaptive. Now, we only have so many pages in the book. I'm trying to target about 400 pages total, and I'm already at risk of hitting that, of exceeding that. So the bulk of the book is going to be in parts 2 and 3, and we're just going to have a little bit about adaptive planning and sort of how you can take advantage of agility. Because in my experience, only about 5% of the teams I talk to are set up as an organization to even try for that zone. Regal Regex, thanks for the comment. I really appreciate it. So as I said, your comments and questions, now is a great time to have a discussion about what's in the book or just Agile in general. I'm going to go back and look through some of the comments that were made while I was reading. Go ahead and put additional comments in the chat, and I will take them as they come. I've got about 35 minutes left scheduled for today's session. We don't need to use it all, but we have the time if we want it. So let me scroll back and see what people were saying. Grumpy Game Dev says they've written 4 books and the fame and fortune got lost in the mail somewhere. Yeah, I think it's in the same dead letter box my fame and fortune is. Jitter Ted says, I think your expectations may be off. Jitter Ted, I refuse to believe that. Uncle Scientist used Waterfall at Raytheon in the 90s. Tom Owen says, I don't like the equality between Waterfall and phase gate. That's an interesting point, Tom Owens. In practice, what I have seen is that phase gate is a way of rebranding Waterfall for a lot of companies because Waterfall is obviously bad and wrong now. Everybody knows this. So we're going to do the same thing, but call it something else. So if Waterfall is requirements analysis and then architecture and then design and then coding and then QA testing, to often with the validation V where we do the validation in reverse. Phase gate is basically the same thing, but we focus more on the sign-offs between phases and maybe we have less iteration. I may be a little cynical about these things. If you disagree with that, I'd love to hear your comments. Let's see if Tom Owens. Tom Owens, thanks for saying that. So if you do want to buy the book, as I said, the early release is going to come out on O'Reilly in the next week or two, and I will announce it right here, jamesshore.com/s/updates. That will give you announcements of all kinds of things that I'm doing, which is mostly focused on the book, or you can just follow the AOAD2 tag on Twitter, which will be specifically for the Art of Agile Development. Immerz Al-Hun says, are you planning to mention certification mills? Well, it's funny you should mention that. The chapter 3, which is not done yet, so I can't really share it. So we'll just pretend I'm not sharing it here. You can't see part 3, pretend there's nothing to see here. Oh yeah, invest in learning. I'll just read this real quick. Agile practices take time to learn. Expect teams' performance to dip by about 10 to 20% for about 2 to 3 months per zone that they're learning. Less with full-time coaching. Possibly more if their learning is entirely self-directed. Delivering zone practices can take longer still, depending on the nature of the team's codebase. You can get faster results if you hire people to help you. There's a wide variety of help available, ranging from occasional mentoring to training to help with process design and implementation to full-time or near full-time coaching. The most effective help you can get is to hire experienced people to join your teams full-time and coach by contributing to your team's real-world work. Ignore the myriad Agile certifications. Although some are connected to excellent training courses, that's entirely dependent on the trainer, not the certification. Don't use Agile certifications for hiring either. They have no teeth. Most demonstrate nothing more than the ability to connect butt to chair for a few days. Instead, do your due diligence. Ask your network for recommendations, sample publicly available materials, and ask for references. And then I go on. So yeah, that's pretty much the only thing we have to say about certification. All right, let's scroll back up here. Grumpy Game Dev says, I used to work at GE. They crossed off waterfall on the label and wrote Agile in the crayon over it. It was iterative waterfall. And iterative waterfall is a great method. Well, it has the potential to be a great method. The really big companies tend to put way too much process around it. But Spiral, which was basically iterative waterfall, or Evo by Tom Gilb, which is not really iterative waterfall, but its own thing and really sort of a proto-agile method. They were all about learning and taking advantage of that learning as you went. But iterative waterfall or spiral is still not agile. Agile is really characterized by its strong emphasis on adaptive planning and people centricity. And iterative waterfall, although it is iterative, it's not adaptive in the same way that Agile is, and it doesn't have the people-centric part at all. I haven't studied Evo, Tom Gilb stuff, enough to say how it fits in, but I have actually been in correspondence with him in the last couple of weeks, and he feels that his stuff is really very much in the Agile mindset, and I see no reason to doubt him. Jitter Ted says, nobody ever really did waterfall anyway. It was more phase gate or just ad hoc. Waterfall is a sort of poorly defined term. Some people say that it's Royce's paper that originally defined waterfall, but as far as I know, he was just documenting what people were already doing. This Pro says, I learned waterfall in college. Jitter Ted basically says what I just said, mainly because waterfall is not a defined process. Very few people actually read the Royce paper where it originated. I'm not sure that it originated there, Jitter Ted, but I think that was and actually I don't know if it was that influential at the time. Laurent Bossovet, is it Bossovet? Yeah, I believe it's Bossovet, has a fantastic book. He published it on LeanPub. I strongly recommend it. It's called Leprechauns of Software Engineering. And let me see if I can bring this up. No, apparently not. Anyway, Leprechauns of Software Engineering is excellent. Laurent goes through and he looks at some of the commonly cited papers that people constantly quote, and he goes back and he finds the source material and finds out what they really said. And it's often not what sort of people say that it said. Anyway, he discusses the Royce paper. Really, really highly recommend it. You can find it on LeanPub. Uncle Scientist, amusing that the placeholder figures of Agile values and Agile principles are waterfall-like images. I guess that's just the standard figure, the standard figure placeholder. Paul Henman asks, why is there a fish in it? That is a good question. And I thought this might come up. And also, it came up last week, although I don't think Pellet asked it last week, although I haven't seen them this week. Asked why is there a twig in a glass? What is the cover? So I prepared a little bit to explain that. So the first edition design was by Karen Montgomery, and I really love the design. It's quite striking. People always ask us, why do you have a water glass with a twig in it? And the answer is maybe not that interesting, but I'm going to tell you anyway. This is the first set of cover proposals that we got from our editor, Mary Tressler, back in March 2007. The book was done at this point. It was just going through the final development process, which took about 6 months. And she said, well, here's 4 covers for you to consider. And Shane and I looked at these, and we were not a fan of any of these covers. Now, the Art of Agile Development is part of O'Reilly's Theory and Practice line, and they all had sort of these real world covers with random dots and lines on them. So we went back to Mary and we said, we don't really love any of these covers. Can we have some more options? And maybe something prettier. We sort of said, this is what the book's about, and this is what we'd like the cover to convey, adapting your plans and so forth. And if failing that, could at least be pretty. And she came back to us and came with a second round of covers. And this was the cover we have now is actually the first option. And then there was one with a random squiggle and a dandelion head on it. And then we had this one, which I actually rather like, with a growing something, a sprout. And then a version of that sprout with a random squiggle with dandelion head. The water one with the little wavy lines, I think that one's really pretty, actually. Stairways with a step, we definitely did not want that, because that would sort of imply, the waterfall, except in reverse. A random ball of rubber bands, and another random ball of almost rubber bands. The Jitter Teds asks, with extreme programming was originally the subtitle. Yeah, we actually had with extreme programming in the subtitle right up towards the end. But this was in 2007. Extreme programming had basically fallen off the radar. And so even though the book chose extreme programming as its method, we ultimately decided to take that off the subtitle, because we decided that we wanted this to be more a general purpose Agile book that used extreme programming, rather than being an extreme programming specific book. The actual original book was, the very, very first intention was to take Chromatic, Shane Warden's book, which was the Extreme Programming Pocket Guide, second edition. The original intention was for this to be a little second edition to the Extreme Programming Pocket Guide. But O'Reilly by then had stopped doing pocket guides because they got lost on the shelf and didn't sell well. And as we got into it, I realized I had a whole heck of a lot to say about Agile. So the little tiny pocket guide that we had decided to do had turned into this massive book, was still a lot about extreme programming, but was also about wider Agile development as well. So we ultimately took the subtitle off. Grumpy Game Dev says, is there a cover must be uninspiring mandate from the publisher? Well, yes and no. So these were the options that we got. And why these options? This was the last one. It was a lamp with sort of wavy lines coming out of it. The design department said, I think the designs speak for themselves, so I won't bore you with designer rationale unless you really want it. So why did they choose this book, this cover, and these options? I don't know. What we came back, though, and said was, we think number 5 is the prettiest, which is the waves, but felt that number 1 would draw more attention on the shelf and conveys the spirit of the book slightly better. So at this point, this is where all your hopes and dreams about there being some deeper meaning behind the cover, this is where I, as an author, completely smash those hopes and dreams. But if you really want a reason for the cover, and the reason is this is what we were given and we chose one. But if you really want a reason, we did feel like the spirit of the book, it's adaptive planning. The sapling grows towards the light. So that is why we chose this cover. Charlie Pancake says, this is like the ending to Lost all over again. Yeah, I mentioned last week when they asked, I announced that I was doing the live stream today, and Pellet asked, why do you have a glass with a twig on the cover? I said, well, I'll explain it next week, but you might be disappointed. So for the second edition, what I said, now the nice thing is it's 13 years later, and O'Reilly has a much different process. It's much more, Agile, and we write source code in ASCII doc, and then there's the early release, so you can actually see the book as it comes out. So the cover comes a lot sooner in the process. For the first edition, the cover came at the end. For this one, it's coming pretty close to the beginning. So my brief was, I like to use the same cover. It's really iconic. People recognize it, but I'd like there to be some growth to sort of symbolize the second edition. And the graphic designer, who I don't have the name of, but I imagine will be credited in the final book, they did this beautiful job, presumably in Photoshop or something, where they added a little bit of growth to the cover, the little green, and they added the fish, the goldfish, which there is no particular meaning, but I just love the splash of color. I love the whimsy of it, and I think it's fantastic. Jitters, Ted. So that's that is the perhaps disappointing reason and explanation behind the cover. Jitter Ted says, I always like the organic feel to Agile, that it grows towards something rather than as a planned roadmap. And yeah, that is why we chose that one over the waves, even though we really liked the waves and the water. I thought it was super pretty. We did like that the twig could be seen as growing towards the light. So if you need a reason, that's the reason. Grumpy Game Dev, I have a twig because I didn't put in a log. Simon Gearing, when did O'Reilly stop doing animals on covers? They still do animals on covers, but there's different lines. So the animal books are the like the programming reference books, and I think those are a lot less relevant today. People are getting their programming reference online rather than getting printed books. And I think they're running, I have no inside information, but I think they're running out of animals. It started out, they were using these Dover woodcuts from the 1800s, I think because it was royalty free. O'Reilly started out as sort of this scrappy upstart publisher. And you'll notice that they've moved on to insects for a lot of their covers, and I think that's because they've run out of mammals. Don't take my word for that. I don't know. But anyway, so this line, Theory and Practice, I think other lines, like the Head First series, it's all the sort of fisheye lens group. It's all looking down at people's heads with giant heads. I think they've come up with different styles for different lines, and this is the Theory and Practice line, which is all real images with some sort of random lines on the cover. Grumpy Game Dev, upgrade now with goldfish. Yeah, it's a brand new book. Buy it. It's got a goldfish. That's all I got to say. Yeah, Jitter Ted basically said what I did. Okay, I'm going to go back up. Again, continue putting your comments in. I'm loving the conversation. We got about 15 minutes left before I'm going to call it a day. So let's see. What do we have next up here? Jay Walter, is a bad idea to support spelling errors here. It's not a bad idea, but I'm going to ignore them because I guess I could actually go in and modify the source code. Sure, why not? Go ahead and report spelling errors. I will update the actual book in real time. We are going to have a proper editing process, and so that's when the real errors will be fixed. But spelling errors are welcome as well. The main thing I'm looking for from the early release process, though, and the open development is feedback about the ideas and concepts. Does it ring true? Do you have additional material that you think we should be included or that you think is important? Is there something that we've said that you don't agree with? Those are the kinds of things we're really looking for in the open development process. And again, to be informed when we put up new chapters for your review, right there, jamesshore.com/ups/updates, or check out the AOAD2 hashtag on Twitter. Charlie Pancake says, I think the biggest problem I've faced is that my team can be agile, but the upper management still need estimates and budgets and milestones, etc. Yeah, that is so true. And in fact, man, I probably shouldn't read this to you, but I'm going to anyway. Chapter 3, which still working on, pretty happy with. It's talking about the investments that you need to make to be successful with Agile. And this section, the second part of this, to get stakeholder buy-in, it's way too long. I'm going to have to cut it down. But I'm going to read a little bit of this. Software teams have always had a contentious relationship with their stakeholders on the matter of deadlines. Sales and product management in particular want accurate forecasting, often called estimating. It's understandable. Their jobs would be much easier if they could tell customers exactly what they're going to get and when. It's important for building trust, securing new customers, and conducting business planning. No matter how much they want it, they usually don't get it. This is a sore spot. But accurate forecasting requires things most companies can't provide. 1, detailed plans that are fixed in advance. This often results in shipping the wrong thing, as we saw in the first chapter. 2, statistical modeling and probabilistic date ranges. Stakeholders usually want simple answers. And 3, no interference in teams' forecasts. Accurate forecasts are usually much bigger than stakeholders want, leading them to be negotiated down to politically acceptable fantasies. Instead, companies put in increasingly elaborate processes to try to control their schedules. It takes a lot of time away from development, and it usually doesn't work. In the end, it all boils down to gut feel, lots of planning, and political maneuvering. All boils down. Agile don't play that. Agile gives you visibility and flexibility. It tells you what is, not what's politically expedient. It shines the harsh light of reality on people's hopes and dreams. In exchange, it lets you steer your plan so you can get the best results possible with the time and people you have. That doesn't mean you won't have roadmaps. You will. See that section for details. But it does mean that your roadmaps aren't ironclad commitments. They're guides, not straitjackets. Some stakeholders love it. Finally, they know what's really going on, and they have the ability to influence the results. Others, especially those who have been disappointed by software developers time after time, see Agile as just another political maneuver, a complicated way to avoid giving them what they need. They fight Agile tooth and nail. You don't need every stakeholder to buy into the Agile way of planning. You do need the ones with lots of political influence to do so. If they don't, they could quietly sabotage their efforts, pulling the rug out from under you in 6 months to a year, even if, or especially if, Agile is succeeding. Then I talk about how to deal with that, and then later on, one thing I really like about this chapter is it says this is what you need, and then it says over and over in, well, if you can't get that. So if concrete commitments are required, Agile teams can work to a deadline. They can even produce a detailed plan in advance. After development begins, their forecasts are typically more accurate than non-Agile teams' forecasts, and they get better over time. What Agile teams can't do is guarantee a fixed scope, set of features, by a fixed date. Almost no one can. If you need certainty, you can plan on fixed scope and ship whenever it's ready, or you can plan on a fixed date and ship whenever it's done on that date. Not both. That said, if your company requires fixed scope, fixed date releases, you can keep using whatever forecasting technique you're using today. Agile won't make it worse, and as development proceeds, it will give you visibility into how things are really working out. Predictive plans aren't the Agile way, but there are more benefits to Agile than adaptive planning, and you can work your way up to true agility over time. Do be careful. Some people like finding scapegoats, and some companies have a culture of assigning blame. Even if Agile doesn't make anything worse, it might be convenient to blame Agile for the same deadlines that would have been missed before Agile. If that's the case at your company, introducing Agile might be a mistake. So yeah, that's what we have to say about your team can be Agile, but upper management still need estimates and budgets and milestones. So you can have estimates and budgets and milestones, etc. You can even do that in an Agile way, but it's not going to be set in stone. If you want, you can do that, but it's not super Agile. But you can be as successful with Agile with that as anything else, which is usually a lot of padding. Grumpy Game Dev says, it's a challenge to be Agile when you have to answer to shareholders on a quarterly basis. It's really not. Shareholders do not need that level of detail. You can tell them, this is the direction we're going without saying, this is exactly what we're doing and when we're going to be done. Jitter Ted says that often results in Agile fall. The team is Agile, but the environment is waterfall. Yeah. And again, you can do that. Tom Owen says, there's something inherently wrong with the basic waterfall process. I can't think of a software development effort that is in a well-understood domain. Some are more well understood than others, but I would say that iterative and incremental development is almost always the right solution. Yeah, I would agree with that, Tom. That said, I do think there are some organizations that are, you see this, for example, in web agencies, digital agencies that are doing a lot of marketing websites. The software behind it is pretty well established. There's going to be a little bit of custom development, but they're basically doing the same thing over again with different with different creative details, but not a lot of development challenge. There's also companies that basically sell white label software. So they've got their software that they sell to big companies, and the big companies customize it. And so they're doing kind of the same thing over and over again. Let's see. I'm just going to see what the comments are. The latest comments are. You had me at goldfish. Uncle Scientist, my only snobby comment is to not cite Wikipedia. What? There's nothing wrong. What's wrong with citing Wikipedia? Don't worry, we're gonna update it. This Pro asks, will no estimates be in the book? Yes, it will. Right here in the accountability chapter. Oh, of course, am showing you the book page. You can go to jamesshore.com/s/AOED2. You can see the draft table of contents, and no estimates is currently penciled in right here. Whether or not it will stay as its own standalone part or will have something else, it will be in there. And part of the reason for that is I don't believe that focusing teams are typically capable of providing useful forecasts. So that's why we put the forecasting section in the delivering zone chapter, or delivering zone part. Chitter Ted says, execs don't like reality from my experience. You know, I'm of two minds on that. So the work I do tends to be with senior software development leaders. And so they're the ones that hire me. And I would say that the execs that hire me, which, as I've said in the past, are all above average, highly intelligent, and even more attractive than usual people, they do like reality. In fact, one of the things that they want is they want to know reality soon, because they hate getting blindsided by errors, by mistakes, by problems. But what they want to do is they want to be able to understand it. They want to be able to respond to it. But they're often in a larger ecosystem where they're working with a marketing department, they're working with a sales department, they're working with a product department. Often the product, I am often actually hired by product leaders as well as engineering leaders. But sometimes when I'm hired by engineering leaders, the product people aren't on board. And that's where we get back to that thing I mentioned in the book, where in chapter 3, where some people see Agile and its reality as actually is actually just a way of telling them they can't have what they want. Salespeople particularly feel this, because sales is a completely different world from software development. Salespeople often see developers as kind of lazy, as they're slackers. That is how they see it. And that's because software developers tend to come in late. They might work late, but they tend to come in late. They tend to, jump around a lot. Sales tends to be really, really concrete. So there's often a lot of friction between engineering and sales, and sometimes that bleeds over to marketing and product. And I wouldn't say that there's a lack of a dislike of reality. It's a dislike of everything that's behind the unpleasant reality that we have to share. And so that's a real challenge, and that's part of the challenge of bringing in adaptive planning and real Agile. Tolterius says, sorry if I'm late in asking this, but what are a summary of changes made over the first edition? Thanks for asking, Tolterius. Yeah, the first edition is a complete restructuring of the second edition is a complete restructuring of the first edition. If you look at the table of contents, you'll see that it's completely different. And if you want, you can go. The first edition table of contents is also on my site, so you can compare the two if you want. So that it's been completely restructured. It's following the Agile Fluency model that I created with Diana Larson, and it's also it's really targeting a different audience. The first edition was for that early majority of people who weren't working in the innovative early adopter companies, but who wanted to really bring in Agile. So what is Agile? How does it work? What's a really practical, pragmatic way of doing Agile? The second edition, also really practical and pragmatic, but now we're targeting sort of the late majority. Everybody's heard of Agile at this point. They think they know what it is. Now we're going to talk to you about how to really do it and how to really do it well. So that's what it's about. Let's see what else we have in the chat. A little bit about Royce's paper, which I think we've talked about. Grumpy Game Dev says, I live by 2 mantras which encapsulate much of the spirit of Agile. Do nothing but the needful and trust nothing in Mr. T. Armed with these, I deliver value adds. I like that. Grumpy Game Dev. Ooh, cargo call to Agile. That's the one we use at work. Yeah, you and everybody else. Oh, I need to show you all, just because I can. I don't know if this will be what's used in the final book, but I have made a little icon for the... So throughout the book, we're going to occasionally put cargo cult, this little cargo cult agilist with a sort of section on what not to do. And this is the icon that I've proposed that we use. Their graphic designers might actually produce something nicer, but yeah. Let's see if I'd have an example of one of those cargo cult agilist sections. I don't know if I do or not. Let's see. I don't remember where I put it. Oh, here it is. Wanting teams but rewarding individuals. The walls are plastered with cheesy motivational posters saying, there is no I in team, and we're all in this together. The official company values list teamwork as number 3. When you complain about unrealistic deadlines, your manager tells you, you need to be a team player. To listen to people talk, teamwork is very important here. And yet, when somebody spent a month helping somebody else, the team's new hire get up to speed on the code base, they were criticized for not getting their work done. They'll figure it out. You've got your own work to do. And when somebody else worked late all weekend hacking in a new feature, breaking everyone else's unit tests in the process, they got a bonus and a special mention at the company's all hands. They're an example of the dedication to excellence we like to see. And in fact, all the recognition and rewards go to individual heroics. There are no team bonuses, no team recognition, no rewards for helping others. Your manager apologizes, but my hands are tied, they say. HR says we can't give group rewards. We have to rank everyone. There's only one, number 1. They say they value teamwork, but you know better. So that's the cargo cult agilist that's going to show up throughout the book. And I tend to be a little cynical when I first write, so some of the edge may be taken off of these. But maybe not. We'll see. All right. We are almost out of time here, but let's see if there's any other comments in here. Somebody names drop safe. No comment. Stand up in the morning equals agile, surely. Well, yeah, why not? I'd say so. And it's even better if you do your stand up sitting down, because standing up, it gets tiring and nobody wants to stand up for 45 minutes, right? With my cargo cult, I'd like to order a side of bike shedding. Just read and follow everything in the margin. Got it. Sorry, Charlie Pancakes. I didn't get it. I don't get what you mean by that. Regal Regex says that was a great intro. Thanks so much. Tom Owens. That's only the intro, but I'm glad you all liked it. I really am. Now all you need is global legislation to make every CEO and CTO required to read it. Getting the ideas in the brains of the folks with the power to change an organizational culture is the problem. As with all hard things, it's a people problem. Yeah, a lot of actually, when I get hired, a lot of it is because somebody read my book, often a team lead or an architect or something like that, and they bring me in and we go talk to the leadership, and then the leadership hires me because it's easier to get them to hire me. And I'm not that cheap, but it's easier to get them to hire me than to read a book. And also, they're more interested in applying the ideas. So all cynicism aside, they're more interested in getting the ideas throughout the company, and hiring me will help them do that. And then as part of my work, it's help bringing them on board and helping them understand their role and how to make this possible and sustaining it, which honestly is not that hard. And it's partly because I come in from the outside, and outsiders are always sort of more listened to than people that are inside the company. Familiarity breeds contempt. But also, it's a matter of knowing how to talk to folks, how to put yourself in their shoes, and also focusing on what they care about, which I think would be a topic for another time. It's a really interesting topic. I would love to talk about it, but we are running out of time here. A lot of cynical comments about sea levels, which I can't really agree with. Is a shift to Agile possible from bottom up, or does it require Cs and VPs to drive the change? Best is from both ends. You want support from the Cs and VPs, and you want bottom up. I actually have, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I've got a whole section of that in the chapter 3 that I could read out, but that'll have to come some other time. Grumpy Game Dev says a few points deducted for not having the whole thing in Markdown. Well, it's actually an ASCII doc, so I think that's even better. All right, let's see. And I think that's most of the comments, and that's also 1 o'clock my time. So I think this is a good place to stop. Thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate the interest. I had a good turnout today, so I'm just thrilled that there's so much interest in the new book. Again, if you would like to see like to be informed when the early release comes out, which should be in the next week or two, it is going through O'Reilly's process right now. Subscribe to updates. It's free, of course. You can subscribe by RSS or email, jamesshore.com/s/updates, or you can follow my Twitter right there. AOAD2 is the hashtag. Next week, we're going back to our normal software engineering scheduling. That's going to be noon Pacific, August 25th. And we're going to be talking about building a microservice client using nullable infrastructure. Thanks so much again. If you want to see more about the book, go check out s/AOD2. That will take you to the table of contents and more information. Thanks again. I will see you all next time.